The summer that Nora Calloway turned 22, the creek on the eastern edge of her father's land ran dry for the first time in living memory. The cattle were restless. The sky was the color of old bone. And three men were sitting on horses at the top of the ridge, looking down at the ranch the way men look at something they have already decided belongs to them. Nora saw them from the garden. She straightened up slowly, her hands dark with soil, and she looked back at them the way her father had taught her, steady, unhurried, giving nothing away. She did not reach for the rifle leaning against the fence post. She did not go inside. She just looked, and after a long moment, the three men turned their horses and rode back over the ridge and disappeared. That was the first day. She had been running the Calloway spread alone for 7 months, since the morning her father, Samuel Calloway, had been found at the bottom of the canyon draw with his horse dead beside him and his neck broken. The county sheriff, a man named Hooper with a soft handshake and careful eyes, had called it an accident. A loose stone, he said. A stumble in the dark. Samuel was getting on in years. These things happened. Nora had stood at the graveside in the cold March wind and said nothing. But she had looked at her father's hands in the coffin, and she had noticed that the knuckles were scraped raw, the way a man's hands look when he has fought someone before the fall, not after it. She kept that to herself. The ranch was called Redbone Flat, named for the reddish clay soil that ran along the creek bottom and stained everything it touched. 80 acres. A solid house. A barn with a good roof. A water claim on a tributary of the Cimarron that her father had registered in the territorial office in 1871, a full 9 years before Nora was born. It was not a grand operation. But it was real, and it was hers, and everything on it had been built by her family's hands, including the fence posts, including the well, including the stone chimney that her father had mortared himself one summer when she was small and had spent the whole time singing hymns off-key until she had begged him to stop. She did not intend to lose it. The men came back 4 days later, and this time there were 5 of them, and they rode all the way down to the yard. Their leader was a man named Denton Cole, and Nora had heard his name before she ever saw his face. He was the land manager for a company called Meridian Land and Water, which had arrived in the territory 2 years earlier with a great deal of money and a great deal of patience, and had been quietly acquiring grazing land and water rights all along the Cimarron Basin. The ranchers who sold to Meridian got fair prices and moved on without trouble. The ranchers who didn't sell found themselves in a different kind of conversation. Cole was not a large man. He had a neat mustache, clean boots, and the kind of pleasant face that was easy to underestimate. He tipped his hat to Nora when he dismounted, and his smile was the kind that cost him nothing. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I was sorry to hear about your father. He was a man who knew this land." "He was," Nora said. She did not invite him in. Cole looked at the house, then at the barn, then at the dry bed of the creek below the eastern fence. "Dry year," he said. "It'll come back. Perhaps." He turned to face her, still with that easy smile. "I'll be direct with you, Miss Calloway, because I think you're a woman who appreciates directness. Meridian is prepared to offer you a fair price for the Redbone Flat, including the water claim. Better than fair, truthfully. Enough to buy a house in Guthrie or Enid. Enough to start fresh." Nora looked past him at his 4 riders, who had spread themselves loosely across the yard the way water spreads when a dam breaks, filling every space they could reach without looking like they were trying to. "The ranch isn't for sale," Nora said. Cole nodded slowly, as though he had expected this, and found it mildly unfortunate. "I understand this is your home. I do. But I want you to think carefully about your situation. A young woman alone, running 80 acres, with the creek low and the cattle down from last winter." He paused. "It's a hard thing." "I've noticed," Nora said. "Miss Calloway, I said it isn't for sale, Mr. Cole." "That's my answer today, and it'll be my answer next week." She looked at him steadily. "I'll ask you and your men to ride out now." Cole held her gaze for a moment. Something moved behind his pleasant eyes, not anger exactly, but a kind of quiet adjustment, the way a man recalculates when a small obstacle turns out to be sturdier than it looked. He put his hat back on and nodded. "Of course," he said. "We'll be in touch." They rode out, and Nora watched them until they were over the ridge. Then she went inside, sat down at her father's desk, and opened the drawer where he kept his papers. She spent the rest of the afternoon reading every document she could find, The original land patent, the water claim registration, the survey records, the deed. She read them twice. Then she folded them carefully, wrapped them in oilskin, and hid them behind the stone in the chimney base that her father had always said was loose, but had never gotten around to fixing. She thought about that for a moment. Her father had said many things were loose or broken without ever fixing them. She was beginning to think some of those things had been done deliberately, and for reasons he had never explained to her. She put the thought away and went to make supper. Over the next 3 weeks, things began to go wrong in small ways that added up. 2 of her hired hands quit on the same morning, within an hour of each other, without explanation. The feed merchant in town told her, apologetically, that he couldn't extend her credit anymore. New policy, nothing personal. A letter arrived from the Territorial Land Office informing her that Meridian Land and Water had filed a petition challenging the water claim on the grounds of a disputed survey line from 1869 2 years before her father had registered the claim at all. She wrote back a careful response, citing the registration date and requesting a copy of the disputed survey. She did not receive a reply. She hired a new hand, a quiet older man named Perkins, who had worked the territory for 30 years and was not afraid of anything. He lasted a week before arriving at the house one evening with his hat in his hands to tell her that someone had come to him privately and explained certain things that made it impossible for him to stay. He was sorry, he said. He genuinely was. What kind of things? Nora asked. Perkins looked at the floor. The kind that have to do with a man's family. Miss Calloway. I have a daughter in Kingfisher. She's got 2 children. He looked up. I'm sorry. After he left, Nora sat on the porch in the dark for a long time and watched the stars come out one by one over the dry creek and the quiet ridge. She was not frightened exactly. She was something more focused than frightened. She was thinking. Her father had taught her to think before she moved. The way you think through a chess game 3 plays ahead. The way you read the weather by watching the grass bend and not the clouds. She was thinking about the survey from 1869, which was 2 years before the Calloway claim, and which she had never heard of before. She was thinking about the way Cole had looked at the dry creek when he first arrived, as though he already knew it was dry. She was thinking about her father's scraped knuckles, and she was thinking about a letter she had found tucked inside the back cover of her father's Bible, written in his hand, never sent, addressed to a man named James Rafferty in the town of Red Fork, Colorado. The letter was short. It said only, "Jim, I think they're coming for the water. If anything happens to me, go to the box. You'll know what to do. Samuel." Nora had read that letter 4 times. She did not know James Rafferty. She did not know what box her father meant. But she knew that Red Fork, Colorado was 4 days' ride, and she knew that her father had written those words, and then decided not to send them, which meant something had stopped him, and she could not stop thinking about what that something might have been. She wrote the letter herself. She sent it the next morning. Then she waited. Cole came back on a Tuesday, without the riders this time, which was somehow worse. He came alone and sat at her kitchen table and laid a document in front of her with the careful deliberateness of a man who has rehearsed this moment. "This is a legal petition," he said, "filed with the Territorial Court in Guthrie. Meridian is asserting prior claim to the water rights based on the 1869 survey, which predates your father's 1871 registration." He folded his hands. "A hearing has been scheduled for September 14th. That gives you about 6 weeks. Nora looked at the document but did not touch it. "On what grounds is the 1869 survey valid? The land wasn't legally surveyed until 1871. The territorial records confirm that." Cole's smile remained easy. "The territorial records reflect the official survey. The 1869 document is a private survey commissioned by the company that held the original land grant in this basin. It predates statehood, and it predates your father's claim." He paused. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Calloway. The outcome of this hearing is not something I would bet against in your favor. The legal fees alone, for 6 weeks of territorial court proceedings, would be considerable. More than this operation can likely bear right now." He tilted his head slightly. "Meridian's offer remains open." Nora looked at him. She thought about the letter in her father's Bible. She thought about Perkins and his daughter in Kingfisher with 2 children. She thought about the 3 men on the ridge on the first day. "I'll need to read the petition carefully," she said. "I'll have an answer for you by the end of the week." Cole nodded. He stood, picked up his hat, and looked around the kitchen the way a man looks at something he is planning to redecorate. "You've kept this place up well," he said. "Your father would be proud." Nora said nothing. After he left, she put the petition on the desk and did not look at it again until morning. When she did, she read every word of it, twice, in the quiet before sunrise. Then she read it a third time with a pencil in her hand, marking the places where the language was careful in a way that suggested it was hiding something. There were 3 such places. All of them had to do with the chain of ownership for the original 1,869 land grant. All of them were vague in the same specific way, which was the way legal language is vague when the facts behind it do not quite hold together. She wrote everything down in a notebook. She noted the dates. She noted the names that appeared in the petition and the names that were conspicuously absent. She pulled out her father's original deed and held it beside the petition and looked at both of them for a long time. And then, near the bottom of her father's deed, in a margin notation she had not noticed before because it was written very small in pencil, she found something. 7 words in her father's handwriting. "Check the grant assignment, 1,868, Denver Records." She stared at those 7 words for a long time. Then, she went to the chimney, took out the oilskin bundle, and checked every document again. The 1,868 Denver records were not there. But the fact that her father had known to look for them meant he had already found something. It meant there was a box somewhere, just as the letter had said. She searched the house that afternoon, the barn, the smokehouse, the old root cellar her father had dug in 1883 and never used because the drainage was wrong. She found it in the root cellar, wrapped in canvas and set inside an old milk can with the lid hammered shut. A wooden box, about the size of a Bible, containing a folded letter from a land attorney in Denver, dated March 1889, and a copy of the 1,868 grant assignment document with 3 paragraphs circled in red ink, and a note in her father's hand that said, simply, "Forged." Nora sat in the root cellar for a full minute without moving. Then she rewrapped everything carefully, put it back in the milk can, hammered the lid shut again, and carried the can into the house and hid it under the kitchen floorboard that had always squeaked. She felt, for the first time in 7 months, like she could see the whole shape of the thing. She also felt, very clearly, that she needed to be careful, because if her father had found this and her father was dead, then the people who wanted this land knew how to make inconvenient discoveries disappear, along with the people who made them. She began writing. Every night, after dark, she documented everything: the forged assignment, the timeline, the dates, the names from the petition, the chain of suspicious events since her father's death, the intimidation of Perkins. She wrote 3 copies of everything. She sent one to the land attorney in Denver, whose name was on the letter in the box. She hid one in the chimney. And she sealed the 3rd and addressed it to the territorial judge in Guthrie, but she did not send it yet. She was waiting. She was waiting for James Rafferty. He arrived on a Wednesday evening in the first week of August, just as the light was going gold across the ridge, and the air had finally cooled enough to breathe without effort. Nora heard the horse on the lane and stood at the screen door and watched him come. He was not what she had expected. She had imagined someone like her father, a rancher, weathered and deliberate. James Rafferty was older than that, with white hair pushed under a plain hat and the kind of stillness in his body that is not laziness, but is something almost its opposite. He rode with perfect economy. He wore no badge. There was a gun on his hip that sat low and easy, and he carried himself the way certain men carry themselves when they have spent a long time being the most dangerous person in any room they enter, and have grown quieter about it, not louder, as the years passed. He dismounted at the gate and stood there looking at the house, and then at Nora, and his expression was unreadable in the way that hides something very readable underneath. "You wrote to me," he said. "You're Jim Rafferty," Nora said. "I am. My father wrote you a letter he never sent," she said. "I sent it for him." He nodded slowly. He looked at the dry creek bed, then back at her. "How bad is it?" he asked. Nora pushed the door open. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you everything." She showed him the box from the root cellar. She showed him the petition. She showed him the notebook with everything she had documented. She showed him the marginal note in her father's deed, and explained what she had been waiting for from the Denver attorney. Rafferty listened without interrupting, which was the thing she noticed most about him. He did not interrupt, did not fill the silence, did not offer reassurances while she was still talking. He just listened with that careful stillness, and looked at each document as she placed it in front of him. When she was done, he sat back and was quiet for a moment. "You've done good work here," he said. It was not flattery. It was the assessment of someone who has spent his life evaluating situations, and was calling this one accurately. "Can you tell me who you are?" Nora asked. "My father never mentioned you." Rafferty looked at the table. "Your father and I worked together, a long time ago," he said. "Before you were born. I was a deputy marshal out of the Denver office." He paused. "I've been out of that life for some years. I run horses now, up in Colorado. But your father knew that if he ever needed someone who understood how land fraud works from the inside, and wasn't afraid of the people who practice it, he knew where to find me." "You were a marshal," Nora said. "I was," Rafferty said. "And before that, I was other things." He looked at her steadily. "The kind of things that made me useful to your father in a situation like this one." Nora looked at him. "Meridian has friends in the territorial government," she said. "The judge who's been assigned to the September hearing, his name is in the petition as a character reference for one of Meridian's principals, from 3 years ago." Rafferty nodded. He had already noticed that. "What do you want?" he asked. The question surprised her. She had expected him to take charge, to explain the plan, to tell her what would happen next. Instead, he was asking her what she wanted, and looking at her the way her father used to look at her, like her answer was the one that mattered. "I want the land," she said. "And I want to know what happened to my father." Rafferty was quiet for a moment. "Those might require different things," he said. "I know," Nora said. "I want both." He nodded once. "All right." In the days that followed, Rafferty was methodical in a way that Nora came to understand was not caution but precision. He rode into town twice, each time returning without saying much about where he had been or who he had spoken to. He read the petition 3 more times and wrote a careful letter to the Denver attorney himself, separately from the one Nora had already sent, and the 2 letters together apparently moved something that had been stationary, because within a week they received a reply that contained a certified copy of the original 1,868 grant assignment from the Colorado Territorial Archive, the real one, not the version Meridian had filed, and the differences between the 2 documents were numerous and specific and damning. Cole came back on a Friday with 2 of his riders and a man in a suit who introduced himself as Meridian's legal representative. They sat on the porch because Nora did not invite them inside. Rafferty sat in the chair by the door and said nothing during the entire conversation, which seemed to unsettle Cole considerably. Cole presented a revised offer. It was higher than the last one. Considerably higher. "No," Nora said. The legal representative laid out a summary of the September hearing timeline and explained, in the careful language of someone who has gone to law school and learned which words frighten people, that the territorial court had a strong precedent for recognizing pre-statehood survey claims. "The 1,868 grant assignment in your petition is a forgery," Nora said. "We have the original from the Colorado Archive. We have a letter from your own Denver attorney dated March of 1,889, confirming the discrepancy. And we have documentation of a pattern of coercion directed at this property and its employees over the past 7 months." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a space very completely. Cole looked at Rafferty for the first time since he had arrived. Rafferty looked back at him without expression. Something passed between them, a recognition, Nora thought, as though Cole had just placed a face he had not been expecting to see. "Who are you?" Cole said. "A friend of the family," Rafferty said. Cole looked at him for another moment. Then he looked at Nora. His easy smile was still present, but it had shifted in some way that was hard to name, the way a mask shifts when the person wearing it has stopped quite believing in it. "I'll need to consult with our office," Cole said. "Of course," Nora said. They rode out, and this time, Nora watched them go with a different feeling than she had felt on any of the previous occasions. Something had broken open. She could feel it the way you feel, a change in the weather, in the air, in the quality of the light, in the way everything went just slightly quieter than it had been. Rafferty stood beside her at the porch rail and watched the riders disappear over the ridge. "Cole recognized you," Nora said. "He did," Rafferty said. "Why?" Rafferty was quiet for a moment. "Because I arrested him once," he said. 14 years ago. Land fraud case in Wyoming. He served 2 years, and then someone paid for a very good attorney, and he walked out with a clean record." He paused. "He'll know now that whatever story he was planning to tell in that Guthrie courtroom is going to be somewhat more complicated than he anticipated." Nora looked at the empty ridge. "Will that be enough?" "No," Rafferty said. "But it's a start." It was Nora herself who found the final piece. Not Rafferty, not the Denver attorney, Nora. She had been going through her father's desk again, more carefully than before, looking for anything she might have missed, when she found a second loose stone in the back of the desk drawer, not the chimney, the desk, and behind it a small tin that contained a single sheet of paper, folded 4 times, on which her father had written out a timeline in his careful handwriting. Every suspicious event at Redbone Flat for the 18 months before his death, every visit from Meridian's people, every conversation, every threat, direct or implied. And at the bottom, in the last entry, dated 3 weeks before he died, "Cole told me directly today that the land will change hands one way or another. Told me to think about Nora. I wrote to Jim. I need to get this to someone who can use it before they decide to stop waiting." Nora read the page 3 times, sitting very still at her father's desk in the quiet of the afternoon, with the sound of the wind moving through the dry grass outside and the distant complaint of cattle somewhere below the ridge. She did not cry. She sat with the grief of it quietly, the way you sit with something too large and too certain to resist, and she let it settle into the part of her that had known for 7 months without being willing to say it plainly. Her father had not fallen. He had been pushed, and he had seen it coming, and he had spent the last weeks of his life trying to make sure she would be all right after. She put the page with the rest of the documents. She sent the 3rd sealed letter to the territorial judge in Guthrie, the one she had been holding. She included her father's timeline, the forged documents, the Colorado Archive certification, and a copy of Rafferty's marshal credentials. She also wrote, plainly and without ornamentation, what she believed had happened to her father and why, and what evidence supported that belief. Then she went outside and she stood at the fence by the dry creek bed, and she looked at the sky, which was turning that particular shade of deep blue that comes in the last minutes before full dark, and she thought about her father singing hymns off-key at the chimney, and she let herself feel how much she missed him, which was very much, which was a weight she understood she would carry for the rest of her life. Behind her, she heard Rafferty come out of the house and stand on the porch. "I sent the letter," she said, without turning around. "I know," he said. "Do you think it'll be enough?" He was quiet for a moment. "Your father was a careful man," he said. "He kept that timeline for 1.5 years. He knew what he was building toward." Another pause. "I think he was counting on you to finish it." Nora looked at the creek. In the last of the light, she could see that the sand in the creek bed was darker along one edge, where the water was just beginning, somewhere far upstream, to find its way back. "He should have told me," she said. "He should have," Rafferty agreed. There was no argument in his voice, just agreement, plain and honest, the way her father's old friend gave her that much. The hearing was held on September 11th in Guthrie, 3 days before the scheduled date, because the territorial judge had moved it forward after receiving Nora's letter. The judge was not the one whose name had appeared in Meridian's petition. That judge had quietly recused himself 5 days earlier, citing a conflict of interest, without explaining what the conflict was. The new judge was a woman named Harlan, which was unusual, and which several men in the courtroom made the mistake of noting aloud, and which the judge addressed, by proceeding with such precise and unhurried competence that no one made that mistake a second time. Nora presented the documents herself, with the Denver attorney on one side of her and Rafferty in a chair along the back wall, watching the proceedings the way a man watches something he already knows the outcome of and is simply waiting for the world to catch up to. The forged assignment was entered into evidence. The original from the Colorado Archive was entered alongside it. The differences required no explanation. They were self-evident to anyone who looked. Meridian's legal representative spoke for 40 minutes and said, in sum, that the discrepancies were the result of clerical error and that the company had acted in good faith at all times. The judge looked at him for a moment after he finished. "The discrepancy is not clerical," she said. "The discrepancy is material and consistent with fraudulent intent. This court does not find the 1,869 petition credible." She looked at the papers in front of her. "The Calloway water claim of 1,871 stands as registered. The Redbone Flat parcel remains in the name of Nora Calloway, sole heir of Samuel Calloway." She set down her pen. "The court also notes that given the evidence submitted regarding the circumstances of Samuel Calloway's death, this matter is being referred to the federal marshal's office for further investigation." The room was very quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet, and Nora sat in the middle of the noise with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and her eyes very clear and very steady, and she thought about her father's 7 words in the margin of the deed. "Check the grant assignment, 1,868. Denver Records." She thought about the way he had left those words for her deliberately, quietly, knowing she would look, knowing she was the kind of person who reads every word twice, and then again with a pencil in her hand. He had known her exactly right. Outside the courthouse, in the September afternoon, with the heat finally beginning to break and a smell of rain on the air from somewhere far off to the west, Rafferty stood beside her on the steps and looked out at the street. "What will you do now?" he asked. Nora thought about it. "Fix the drainage in the root cellar," she said. "Hire 2 new hands. See about getting the creek to run right again." She looked sideways at him. "You could stay, you know, for a while. There's work, if you want it." Rafferty looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was the kind of thing that lives in the same country as one. "Maybe for a while," he said. Behind them, somewhere down the street, a door opened, and the sound of a piano drifted out into the afternoon, loose and unhurried, the way music sounds when no one is particularly trying to play it well, just playing it because the afternoon is long and the day has gone all right, and that, for now, is enough. The creek at Redbone Flat came back in October, a month earlier than anyone expected. The cattle moved to the eastern pasture. The root cellar was fixed. The chimney stone was remortared, tightly this time, though Nora left one document behind it, still her father's timeline, which she could not quite bring herself to put anywhere that felt less permanent. She left it there, and she let it stay, the way you leave certain things in the walls of a house you intend to keep. Because the land was hers, and the water was hers, and the truth of what had happened was hers now too, held in the stones and the clay and the dry creek running again, memory of a man who had known this ground his whole life and had trusted his daughter to know it after him. Some things, once found, do not need to be carried out into the light. Some things are enough just to be known. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to let go of what is true. Nora didn't win because she was fearless. She won because she was patient, careful, and willing to keep looking even when looking was painful. The evidence was always there, waiting in her father's handwriting, in the margins, in the walls. Truth doesn't disappear. It waits for someone brave enough to find it. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted for your entertainment, and to share a small, hopeful lesson about the quiet strength that lives inside all of us.